Okay, do that.
Today, my guest is Svante Winberg, who is a professor at the Department of Neuroscience at Uppsala University, lecturer, author, co-author of numerous scientific publications, and he's currently conducting research with zebrafish, examining the variation of behavioral traits within species and how that is controlled. I'm saying this. So, could you now please tell me a little bit more about research?
Yeah, what we are interested in is, in fact, that how you respond to a stressor varies a lot within species, within humans as well as in other vertebrates, actually even in invertebrates. It seems to be something evolutionary, highly conserved, that there are these different ways to handle threats that you meet. And what we are doing now is that we're using zebrafish because zebrafish has many advantages. They have a very short generation time. They are small in size, which makes it easy to keep them in lab. And you can have them quite large numbers and get them to perform quite normal behavior in relatively small tanks. And I mean, there's a lot of research on zebrafish now, and we have the fully sequenced genome, which is very well annotated and so on. So there are many advantages with them. But what we have been doing is actually, we are using wild-caught zebrafish. So I have a colleague who made an expedition to India where he caught fish, and I got fish from him. So we actually started out with wild zebrafish. And what we do then is that we screen them for what we call personality, or what we actually screen for is boldness. Because that's one of the traits that seems to differ between these different types of animals. So you have these very bold animals that if they're threatened they try to fight or flee or do something very active. And then you have on the other side of the normal distribution.
Right. So I suppose these are the ones that have a good stress response if we translated it into...
Yeah. They have. So we screen them, so we get the really bold ones and the really shy ones, and those we use for parents for the next generation. So in that way, we're going to generate 2 strains of zebrafish with different behavioral and physiological traits. And what we're interested in is, of course, in the brain and in the hormonal system, what makes this difference? Why are they different in behavior and in physiology? So what we're going to do is to do something called genome-wide association studies. So we're going to try to find specific genes which seems to be related to the behavioral traits in these 2 lines. And we're also going to look at gene expression. So we're going to expose them to stressors and see how they differ in their response to the stressor. And also we're going to put them, because this is actually related to this very old question in biology called nature or nurture. So I mean, how we behave depends both on our genes and on the environment. And I mean, I would say always there is a combination, there is an interaction between genes and environment. And I think we can address this in this zebrafish because we select them for these different types of animals, and then we can put those animals in different kind of environments and see how they respond. And the environment we're going to change, the factors we're going to change is their social position. So we're going to make the fish either socially dominant or socially subordinate and see how they respond. And we do that with both of those lines. And then we can see how the genome is interacting with the environment. And we're going to look both at the behavior and physiology and
How do you think it can be translated to the human? What can we learn?
Yeah, I mean, of course, that can be translated to the human condition, because that's the same in humans, that our behavior is very much guided by our genes, but there is an interaction with the environment, of course. There's been lots of studies on youth, for instance, that if you grow up in a certain environment, you run the higher risk to becoming a drug addict or criminal in some way. But if you have the same kind of genes and grow up in a very enriched environment, those same genes can actually be very good for you and you will be very successful in society. So there is this kind of interaction. So some genes are bad or will be a disadvantage in one environment, but they could be a big advantage in a different environment. So it's that kind of questions we're interested in.
Right, but do you think also that as far as coping mechanisms, there will be some revelation in this study that you do? How could we better cope if we are at a disadvantage? For example, we are one of the shy fish, you know.
Well, if I can, sorry, I lose this, the sound sometimes, it's lagging a little bit.
Yeah, so if we were the shy fish, for example, in us humans, what kind of, like your study, would there be any kind of revelation how we can cope better being equipped with worse predisposition genetically speaking, to cope better with stress? Will there be like some sort of a take on that as well?
Yeah, I mean, what we do is not, we can't directly say how we could, but what we could perhaps do is to understand why this is happening. And if we understand it, we at least have a better chance to give those people a better chance for a more happy life.
Yes. I would like to ask you a little bit about, Hans Selye. Of course, he's the father of the stress theory, and your opinion basically on his setup, the alarm stage, resistance, and exhaustion in the next question. However, now just one thing I would like to what he said: the apparent cause of illness is often an infection and intoxication, nervous exhaustion, or merely old age. But actually, a breakdown of the hormonal mechanism seems to be the most common alternate cause of death in man. What's your take on that?
No, I mean, many of those things will eventually result in a breakdown in endocrine regulation. I mean, have disease that will also cause the kind of changes that will probably ultimately result in a breakdown of the endocrine system. So it's hard to, I mean, many things would do that. And I agree, eventually that's probably what's going to happen, that it breaks down, and then we won't be able to keep our homeostasis, and then we are in a bad situation.
So basically, stress is really about that, right? That we lose this homeostasis because we are no longer able to cope. I would like to go into a little bit into these stages that Selye defined, like the alarm stage, starting with. So what's happening during that stage, basically? Could you explain a little bit more about that?
Yeah, the first thing that happens is that you activate, the most rapid response is to activate the sympathetic nervous system. That's almost an instant response. And that results in, you get more release of norepinephrine in your synapses in the sympathetic nervous system, but you also activate your adrenal medulla, so you pump out adrenaline into your circulation. So that goes all over your body, and that would redistribute, for instance, your blood flow. So you will focus the blood flow on tissues or organs which are very important for meeting this threat, and that's mainly muscles and the brain, of course. And you will also get effects on the heart. So the heart will start to beat faster, so the frequency will increase, but also the actual stroke, the force will also increase. And together that results in more blood for each pumping. So you get a larger volume of blood per minute that goes out into your circulation, focused onto the skeletal muscles and the brain. And then you will turn off circulation to, for instance, the gastrointestinal tract. so you don't send blood. That may sound a bit strange because that's where you can get energy from, but I mean that's a too slow process to get energy from what you've been eating if you are in an alarm situation. So then you just shut down that, and instead you activate the breakdown of glycogen from glycogen stores in the liver, increasing plasma levels of glucose. And you also increase breathing. I mean, the bronchi will dilate, so you get more oxygen, more air into your lungs. So together that means that you have more oxygen, you have more energy substrate, and you send that both the oxygen and the substrate to the organs where you really need it, so the muscle and the brain. And also fat, you will start to lipolysis, you will break down fat in your adipose tissue and send out free fatty acids into the circulation. That varies a little bit between men and females, mainly in men, especially before menopause. So there's a big difference in that, which means that men is probably more in risk for heart disease.
I was just going to ask you this because with the increase in our day and age, of course, we get a huge increase in chronic diseases never seen before in history of mankind, such as diabetes, gastrointestinal diseases, cancers, and heart disease. To me, it seems like a lot of this is stress related because, as you say, oxygen and oxygen, there's more surge of oxygen, of course, but all the focus of a stress response takes away from, of course, like the digestive organs, for example. And instead, we have this huge increase of these broken down metabolites, like you say, that we use for energy and also for basically lipolysis and such. So, do you think that the stress?
No, I mean, stress is it's a very adaptive response. I mean, it's really focused on meeting a threat.
Right.
So, I mean, no animal will survive out in the wild without this very efficient stress response. The problem is when we activate it in the wrong situation or for a long time. That's when we get the health problems. Otherwise, I mean, the stress response is a very, very adaptive response. So that's very important for us to meet all these threats.